Hi, my name is Nihal Singh, and this is my presentation on the sensory receptors in the periphery and their links to the central nervous system. So, sensory receptors are specialized nerve endings or cells that detect stimuli from the environment and convert them into electrical signals, which the nervous system then interprets. And these receptors are found all throughout the body, including the skin, eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. We have several different kinds of sensory receptors. We have simple receptors. Um, they will have free nerve endings, and they might have a myelinated or an unmyelinated axon. Then we have complex neural receptors. So these are going to have connective tissue surrounding those nerve endings as opposed to those nerve endings being free, as was seen in the uh, simple receptor. They also typically have the myelinated axons, which allows for faster transmission of the electrical impulses. And then we also have special senses receptors. So these are going to have the neurotransmitter release, which initiates the action potential, as opposed to the simple and complex receptors, which just had the nerve endings that were stimulated, and then the electric signal was transmitted. Um, the particular illustration here shows a hair cell found in the ear for the special senses receptor. This complex neural receptor shows a Pacinian corpuscle which senses touch. So we can put different receptors into different categories. So we have chemoreceptors, which are going to detect changes in oxygen and pH, um, blood, uh, carbon dioxide in the blood, oxygen in the blood, changes in those. Then we have mechanoreceptors, which are going to detect pressure changes, vibration, and sound. Then we have photoreceptors. Those are going to be reacting to stimuli of photons of light. So those will be found in your eyes. And then thermoreceptors, which detect temperature changes, varying degrees of heat. So this shows a broad view of the different sensory pathways in the brain. Um, so we have most of the senses uh, projecting to the thalamus before they are relayed to their appropriate cortex. So, for example, we have sound. So the sensory receptors in the ear will interact with the sound, transmit that signal to the thalamus, where then it will be directed to the auditory complex. Um, Same thing with vision. So uh, visual stimuli will interact with the sensory receptors in the eye, which will go towards the thalamus and then be relayed to the visual cortex. So a lot of the sensory pathways project to the thalamus before they go to their appropriate cortex. One exception would be olfactory pathways, which are have to do with smell. So that so the nose picks up those, the sensory receptors in the nose pick up those, and that is sent to the olfactory bulb, and then it's relayed to the olfactory cortex. So that does not have anything to do with the thalamus. There's no stop at the thalamus before. Um, all right, next slide. So this is primarily talking about this slide is primarily talking about the somatosensory pathways. So somatosensory is referring to touch and pain, um, temperature, proprioception, which is the awareness of your body position, and vibration. So this shows you two different pathways for fine touch, proprioception, and vibration. That has its particular pathway, and then irritants or pain, temperature, and coarse touch has a different pathway. So fine touch, proprioception, and vibration, the sensory receptors are going to interact with that stimuli, and the primary sensory neurons are going to carry that to the medulla, where they will synapse or communicate with the secondary sensory neuron. And then that takes the information to the thalamus, where it synapses with the tertiary secondary sensory neurons, and then it's going to be relayed to the appropriate cortex, which is the primary somatic sensory cortex. Now, for irritants, temperature, and coarse touch, it's a bit different. The sensory receptors interact with those stimuli, and they synapse in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So the primary sensory neurons go to the spinal cord, then the secondary sensory neurons will take that information, and they won't stop at the medulla, but they'll actually go past the medulla to the thalamus and synapse with the tertiary sensory neuron, which then brings it to the cortex, the primary somatic sensory cortex. So just to kind of recap, there are different kinds of receptors: chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, photoreceptors, and thermoreceptors. They each are going to be transmitting their own types of stimuli, which we saw before in the a few slides ago. Chemoreceptors are those are kind of focused on those chemical stimuli. Mechanoreceptors are the touch and the pressure. Photoreceptors, visual. Thermoreceptors are temperature. And we also saw that many of the sensory pathways arrive at the thalamus before being sent to the appropriate cortex. Not all, but many of them do. And then we also saw that for the pathways to the primary somatic sensory cortex, which deals with touch and vibration and proprioception, we saw that there were primary, secondary, and tertiary sensory neurons that communicate with each other and synapse with each other to send the message to the cortex. And primary, secondary, and tertiary sensory neurons are also seen in other pathways besides the somatic sensory cortex. So I have a worksheet for all this. So Identify whether each picture shows a simple, complex, or special senses receptor. So here we notice that that it's an unmyelinated axon. There's free nerve endings. So if you were to go back to the slide, you would notice that that would be a simple receptor, simple sensory receptor. Then we have this right here that shows that there are synaptic vesicles, which are going to release a neurotransmitter. So if you recall, that had to do with the special senses. That was the special senses receptor. And also there was the myelinated axon here. This also has a myelinated axon, and this shows a layer of connective tissue kind of covering up that nerve ending. And the next question, so we have the mechanoreceptors, and we're trying to figure out which one of these is the appropriate stimuli for the mechanoreceptor. So if you recall from the slide, that would be pressure, vibration, and sound. The thermoreceptor has to do with temperature. So that's going to be varying degrees of heat. So that's going to be D. The photoreceptor is vision related. That's going to be photons of light. And then the chemoreceptor, that's going to be oxygen, pH, and various organic molecules, including glucose. Next question. Give an example of a sensory pathway that does not pass through the thalamus on the way to its cortex. So if you recall from earlier, I mentioned that the olfactory pathway does not pass through the thalamus, as you would be able to see on that particular slide. It goes from the olfactory bulb to the olfactory cortex. Number 4, in regards to fine touch, proprioception, and vibration, does the primary sensory neuron synapse in the medulla or the dorsal horn of the spinal cord? So again, from the slide, we would see that the primary sensory neuron for fine touch, proprioception, and vibration synapse in the medulla. In regards to coarse touch and irritants and nociception, that would synapse in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, which was also seen in that slide. Then explain why a sensory receptor with a myelinated axon will transmit information faster than a sensory receptor with an unmyelinated axon. So a myelinated axon has little sections between the Schwann cells, the myelinated parts that are unmyelinated. So those bits of unmyelinated parts of the axon are called the nodes of Ranvier, and the electric impulse is able to kind of hop between those nodes of Ranvier, and that allows the information to transmit faster than with an axon that is unmyelinated. And finally, number 6, out of the 3 types of receptors, simple, complex, and special sensory receptors, which one makes use of the neurotransmitter release to propagate the electrical impulse? You will recall that the special senses receptor used the neurotransmitter release. The synaptic vesicles released that neurotransmitter to initiate the action potential to propagate the electrical impulse. That concludes my presentation on the sensory receptors in the periphery and their links to the central nervous system. Thank you.